there's going to be kind of a summary very soon here. Mangroves, man, mangroves. I hope you've had the chance to snorkel clear water mangroves where they have a lot of animals inside those properties. It's just it's a cathedral. It's just an extraordinary thing. It was life-changing for me when I was 14, 15 years old and started to put on a snorkel and snorkel the mangroves of Jupiter Inlet before it was turned into Boca Raton. And you know, that Jupiter Inlet used to be phenomenal. Effects on mangrove forests co-vary with extreme rain and wind events, relative sea level, etc. There are evidence of northern shifts in the distribution of mangroves. Wow, that's good. The mangroves are moving up the coast. More mangroves, that's good. Are they now occupying and competing with organisms that didn't have to deal with them in the past? Yeah, salt marshes. So salt marsh mangrove interactions are an interesting area of new research. Maybe it's good for the mangroves. Don't know if it's good for the salt marshes. Well, a lot of people are looking at that, or some at least. Extreme weather adds stress through direct physical damage and hydrological changes. More hurricanes. Yet hurricanes aren't usually good for seagrass systems. Okay. Or mangrove systems. Quickly to summarize on this thing we could talk about for another 45 minutes, vegetation, marine vegetation and climate. Both losses and gains for aquatic plants. Potential growth increases due to higher CO2 levels, with co-occurring negative physiological consequences from complex temperature and salinity stressors. Sorry, you know, not everything's black and white. You know, freeze kids. You know, have a life all the way through. There's a lot of things that ain't black and white. Okay? We know enough to know that there's going to be a lot of changes, and this is one of the less malignant realms, but we don't know the relative benign versus malignant ratios for a lot of things here. Unfortunately, we know more about the ratios of good and bad with coral reefs. So, ocean heating and coral reefs. Corals are animals, they're animals. They're not rocks, they're animals that build calcium carbonate skeletons, those wonderful limestone rocks we assume sometimes are the animals themselves, with partner algae in their tissues. There's special algae that they have in their tissues. Without the algae, they can't function right. Resulting reefs have high ecological and monetary value. Spanish hogfish, those get big. Spearing that baby, got a nice meal. Right? Corals coexist with these algal partners. They are codependent, they need each other. So you folks might have heard of coral bleaching. Unusually hot water causes corals of many species to expel these essential algal partners. And they turn white. And it's an interesting process. Shown here, relatively healthy corals, bleached corals, and then corals that are beyond bleaching. Now it's converted into an algae-dominated system. And it's an interesting phenomenon here because, again, it's not black and white. Okay, there's some good and there's some bad, but in this case, the bad is pretty much overwhelmingly good. With global coral reefs, certainly, I don't know if you guys, the Great Barrier Reef, I don't know if you folks have been hearing about the bleaching events there. It's moving faster and with more negative consequences than a lot of very sober people would have thought down there. And so what you see is you've got a healthy coral, gets exposed to extremely warm water via any number of events now that can happen. The coral becomes bleached. Importantly, one bleaching event doesn't necessarily kill that coral. 2 or 3 bleaching events may not even kill that coral. But the thing about these events is that they are repetitive over time, often, increasingly so. And with continued bleaching events, ultimately the coral dies and then is often rapidly colonized by algae. And once the coral is colonized by algae, new coral can't come in, and that reef is going down, often rapidly. Overfishing contributes to this. There's lots of additional covariant factors here that we don't have time to get into. Around the world, a big paper came out in 2008, the Carpenter et al. Paper. 1/3 of corals, Dr. Yoshioka, 1/3 of corals is in possible danger of extinction from climate change. Carpenter and about 20 other authors on this paper. I saw some leading coral people a couple of months ago, and I asked them about that paper, and I said, "Is it looking any better?" And he looked at me and almost laughed. Of course I knew the answer. The answer is not yes. The answer is no. Things are not looking better. Does this mean all corals are going to go extinct? No. The literature right now is suggesting that specialized species of corals are much more a threat than generalized species. So over time, what we're going to see is a loss of coral species diversity and a rise of the generalists. I don't know about you guys, but I like specialists and I like generalists. Humans. I like a generalist, a guy who can listen to, Southern Rock and Miles Davis. I also like the guy who only wants to listen to Miles Davis. Well, we're going to lose a bunch of specialists in the next 100 years, marine systems. The details, no one can predict them in a super precise manner, but we're already seeing this happen. Many things influencing this beyond bleaching. It turns out that many diseases seem to be more frequent in the presence of hotter water. You're stressing an organism. A person is going to be more susceptible to the coronavirus if they're already really sick, if their immune system is compromised, right? That's a child can understand that. Compromised immune system, more susceptible to disease, right? Well, every organism we're talking about right now, and we haven't gotten into acidification and other things yet, they're being compromised in all kinds of manners physiologically. So they're more susceptible to disease. And some of you might have heard there's a new coral disease. You heard about the new coral disease? Excuse me?
Coral wasting?
The Stony coral tissue loss disease, formerly called the white plague. Search Stony coral tissue loss disease. The Florida Keys is in a red alert on this, around the Caribbean. That might be an earlier name. There's a lot of coral diseases out there, by the way. Okay. Another habitat that's significant in our region is our nearshore hard-bottom reefs, our Coquina Reefs. So you guys ever go out to the bathtub reef? Man, I used to go there all the time. It's a phenomenal place. It still is. Jupiter Island, there's a place, Coral Cove. Coral Cove, anybody? Blowing Rocks? Okay. We have these nearshore hard-bottom reefs that are really quite impressive. That's bathtub. They provide services not only to reef organisms, both temperate and tropical, but also to humans. When they're exposed in Satellite Beach, it's amazing. The kids leave their cell phones on the towel and they run down and they turn into little marine biologists. I don't know, you're this pretty young audience, very few of you look like you're over the age of 50, but do you remember when you were a kid walking in the woods or on the beach and finding your first horseshoe crab and turning that over and looking at the legs? There's an argument that children and adults need that. There's many arguments for that. Have you guys heard of the book, Last Child in the Woods? The 04 book where the term nature deficit disorder was introduced? Nature deficit disorder. Okay. So these systems we're talking about, whether it's a mangrove or a seagrass bed, hey, it's really cool to snorkel over seagrass beds too. Nearshore reefs, they have values beyond just their habitat values for the marine organisms. They have values to us and our kids. Get them off the electronics, slow things down, focus, telescope in. Oh my God, it just turned bright green when I touched it. And that's not a computer monitor, that's a living, breathing thing. So this is very important. I encourage you to pass this on to your people. get in touch with these things. FYI, myself and colleagues have a book coming out, a Springer Press book. We worked about 8 to 10 years on, depending on how you slice it, called Islands in the Sand. It will come out in about 2 months. There'll be information distributed on this when it appears. This is a major book with over 1,250 references, and you're thinking, oh my God, what a snooze fest that's going to be. We've tried hard to take this habitat, and the way I'm describing this book is it's like a technical coffee table book. We have 100 figures in this book, like this, unpacking things people don't know. So Islands in the Sand, stay tuned. Springer Press. Well, how about changes in fishery habitats and species distributions? Folks, there are so many journal articles already out on how species distributions of fishes are changing. These are a couple of examples. Many of the articles talk about the physiological, the biochemical implications of this. For black sea bass, that's a great fishery species here. A lot of people really are into that. Many of these changes are driving putative habitat and distribution changes. Depending on the species, preferred habitats may shift north, or they can go into deeper water. So in an XY coordinates system, with climate change and marine organisms, they're not only going to maybe be pushed north, which a lot of them appear to be showing evidence of, but some of them are going deeper. Many estuaries will become more marine, by the way. The Indian River Lagoon is going to become an increasingly marine system over time. I'm not saying in the next 20 years, but certainly by the end of the century. A big driver of that is sea level rise. We'll talk about. We're not going to skip sea level rise here, so we'll talk about that.
What do you mean by more marine?
Salt.
Good question.
Oh,
Higher saltwater
thank you.
concentration. Thank you. So impacts on fishes and impacts on fishing. This is one of the things that makes the Keys and Southeast Florida and the Caribbean special. These incredible reef systems we have. And many of these animals, not all, but a significant portion of them, use estuaries or at least high salinity nearshore waters as juveniles. Many of these organisms, not the majority, but many very important types of fishes like these Nassau grouper, they aggregate to spawn. Imagine if all of the people in Miami on a full moon in January migrated to a reef offshore. That's fun. That's how it works in some groupers and snappers. Very complicated things going on there. To get all those fish to migrate 50 kilometers to a reef in the middle of nowhere while they're being hammered by fishermen. There's very interesting, this is one of the things I work on, there's very interesting research right now showing that all kinds of issues involved in the spawning aggregation formation may undergo slow disruptions with ocean heat content increases and other things. Those nearshore reefs are wonderful places to fish off of Satellite Beach. You get out there at sunrise with a fly rod and people hook tarpon, snook. That, by the way, is a redfish, and that ain't in the lagoon. That's on the windward side, the ocean side of the barrier island. Redfish do migrate along the coast. And this is such an important part of growing up in Florida. Sherry made an important comment. So many people living in Port St. Lucie and Stewart and Fort Pierce and Melbourne and Jupiter and everything, they don't know a damn thing about Florida. Not their fault. They've only lived here 3 to 5 years, but they're living inside, they're just completely closed off from what some of us grew up with. And arguably, we have the right to protect. That is William Gibson. The picture was taken by Terry Gibson. Some of you might know Terry. That's his mom. She's been teaching at a high school in West Palm Beach and still teaches since 1971. Fished her whole life, shoots. going to outlive a lot of us. So the experiences of fishing are changing. You know, I don't want to, fish kills. If all the fish are being killed and you're part of the lagoon, then your fishing experiences are going to change. Okay? I don't want to talk more about fish kills. Talked about that a little earlier. All right. Species distribution shifts change your fishing options. Many commercial and recreational fishermen are noting that pelagic fishery species are moving further north. Cobia, sailfish, others could name their species of interest, are showing movements to the north, to the point where the federal fishery management councils are now creating specialized working groups to begin to get their arms around what the hell does this do to our regulation scheme. They've got regulations that have been built out for 20 or 30 years. Now that the stocks are moving, they're changing jurisdictions, right? So there's a Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council. There's a big fishery management council that takes care of the Chesapeake Bay and the Mid-Atlantic region. Well, now they're talking to the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council because all of the SAFM species are, not all, a variety of important species from the south are beginning to populate that northern jurisdiction, which has a completely different fishery management regulatory regime. We're talking about lots of laws here, lots of money. Spawning changes I mentioned. Just fishing. A lot of fishermen are telling me, especially when, last summer, that every time they put a hook in the water, every time, maybe that's what they said, maybe it isn't every time, it's slimed by filamentous algae. And offshore, I don't know if you've been following the sargassum, there's a lot of interesting things. You know sargassum, the great drift algae that blows up on the beaches. And, we have a tremendous amount of sargassum appearing now. And Ben Hardig here, extraordinarily experienced master fishermen and fishery managers like Ben Hardig, very careful observers, have talked to me repeatedly about how difficult it is to just fish for a variety of things that they have to catch to pay their mortgages because of the amount of algae on the surface offshore in certain times of the year. A lot of other stuff here. Predator and we haven't even talked about the food web implications of this. Okay. We could scale this up and just put up diagrams that are so complex talking about how prey and predator relationships are changing in ways we don't know. Many of these things we'll never really know. Probably. Okay, so I put this slide back up here to remind everybody that this is, a lot of this is geophysics. Okay, so let's talk about the next list item, and that's extreme weather events, rainfall and storms. I said I'd keep working through this. Everybody okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. And by the way, it's coming out on a Thursday night at 6 o'clock. Awesome, thank you. You can be home, there's like 500 channels I've heard you could be watching. So
none of them have anything good on.
Most do. So there are dozens to hundreds of connected geophysical systems. And as they get more out of balance, just as it's been predicted by geophysicists for decades in some cases, the outer boundaries of the trends get more extreme. The hots get hotter. The droughts get longer. The floods get more intense. More pulse runoff. Hydrological responses include more erosion, more runoff. You can think about that in terms of the lagoon. Sea surface temperatures, you might have heard, are breaking records everywhere. The Gulf of Mexico now, by late summer every year, the sea surface temperatures there are just completely destroying the records from 10 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. We've had 5 Category 5 hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin in the last 4 years. Okay, we've had 3 hits or near misses in Florida in the last several years. Okay, there's a thing called Hurricane Amnesia, which, you know, Florida isn't the sunshine state anymore. If Florida was the sunshine state, we would have solar panels at least on, 1% of the structures. Yeah, Florida ought to be called no, I'm not really serious about this, of course. The hurricane amnesia state. We are living in a very interesting time right now. We just had, it doesn't have to be a category 5. Does anybody remember Matthew from a few years back?
Yes.
Category 3 scared the living Jesus out of a lot of us, and it just wobbled at the last minute. Remember the weather reports?
Yeah.
We're saying it was going to go up I-95
Yes.
as a 3. And you guys had, in 0405, did Gene and Francis impact you guys?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
It was really impactful, right?
Yes.
Those were category 1s. And I have to have Hurricane Andrew in here. Anybody know what year that was?
93.
How many people lost their house? 3 or 4 of us. Thank you for knowing that date. Hurricane Andrew was a 4. Blew right in. Thank God it moved fast and it was dry. We lost our house 8 miles inland. We lived 8 miles inland. We lost our house. You don't even hear about wind anymore. You hear about flooding. Beware of the wind when it's a category 3, 4, 5. That's when roofs come off. New roofs, depends. So I have Andrew in here, I have Irma in here because that was a 5, but it didn't really hit mainland Florida as a 5. And then Dorian. How long ago was that? That was almost 6 months ago. It was a little over 6 months. It's just been 6 months. I haven't seen anything about Dorian for like 4 months. It's just, oh, the Bahamas, they're putting it together. Right. You guys know about, the thing with Dorian, right? It would have like pulverized you guys, right, down here. And what happened was it sat, it stopped, it was coming at us. And because of geophysical dynamics, that the Weather Service was able to predict like with a 24-hour lead. And everyone's beating up on the Weather Service. The Weather Service guys are heroes, what they're doing. Because of the geophysical luck of the draw, there was a frontal system. It showed up just in the nick of freaking time. It installed that thing over those godforsaken people in the Everglades. All right? If that system had been delayed 2 days, installed it, and the system had come here, that storm could have stalled right over Stewart. Right? I mean, everybody knows that, right? Everybody remembers that. You need to remember that. It's forgotten.
It's not.
Okay. Sea level rise. This could be multiple 1-hour talks. I'm going to summarize something for you that might be helpful. The East Central Florida Regional Resiliency Action Plan was completed in late 2018. The East Central Florida Regional Planning Council brought together a bunch of lead folks. Like 100 people commented on a big plan. It's on the web. If you type in that, you will get the 140-page regional resiliency plan for the Treasure Coast and East Central Florida, the Orlando area. They had a sea level rise subcommittee that I was on with smarter people than me. And after a lot of wrangling and thinking, this is the consensus sea level curve that was adopted by the very conservative, very thoughtful, very developer-centric East Central Florida Regional Planning Council. And the main point is that the lower range, this is for planners, okay? 2020, 50 years out is often a common planning cycle. So 2020 to 2070, low, these are feet, high, 2100. We're looking at 2100 at a lower range of 5.5 feet of sea level rise increase and an upper range of 8.5 feet of sea level rise increase. Okay. Now the interesting thing about this is this is another thing that just hasn't been picked up on. I spent 30 years working on climate issues and beach issues and other issues. Climate has just crept in. By the way, no one's making any money on this. I don't want to be talking about climate. I'd rather be talking to you about cool things involving reef fishes and reefs. Okay? This has hijacked the lives of many people, this whole climate thing. We're not making money off this. I've had a couple grants. I lost money on the $20,000 I got on those grants. Nothing. So if anybody wants to come and, politely or not so politely ask me after this talk, like I've had happen before, about, well, aren't you making a lot of money on grants? First thing is, how dare you think you know my finances, but no problem. Number two, it's the complete opposite. I'm sick of this. I don't want to talk about climate. This was avoidable. I was taught about climate change in high school in West Palm Beach by Ken Berg, a guy with a master's degree in an honors environmental science class. Laid it all out. 1975. So, my point, for 30 years I've been talking about sea level rise. I'm not a sea level rise geophysicist using the best available science. What have we said for 30 years about sea level rise by 2100? We said 1 to 3 feet. In the last 5 years, everybody, that changed. FYI, it's not 1 to 3 feet anymore. And I'm not much of a betting man, but I bet, $100 or so that in 10 or 20 years, that's going to go up a little bit. Why? Because that's the history of all of these predictions. We continuously underestimate. There are all these guys in suits that make $500 an hour called alarmists, extremists, radicals. The reality of the scientific literature over the last 30, 40 years on this is that most of the, by far the great majority of the predictions have been underestimates because we're getting beaten on all the time. Not just by the climate deniers, but by other scientists. We got to be really careful. So, FYI, 8.5 feet high, 5 feet low. That's going to go up in 20 years, probably. Unless we start to reduce all those GHG emissions, especially methane. Really fast, like in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20, 30. You might have heard about some of those reports. Meanwhile, the rest of Florida has a lot of interesting things in its future. I love the Florida Keys. Dr. Kuchera and I used to we picked up hitchhikers driving to the Keys in high school. We went through Plantation Key. I never had a clue as to how overpopulated Plantation Key was until I got Google Earth and started looking around. Okay. The Keys has lots of things like this. Imagine a Matthew, not a category 3 there. Glass is half full. A lot of people in the Keys are very aware of this. You talk to there's a sustainability director for the Keys. She's very wide-eyed about this. A lot of people are talking about designing and building our way out of this. There's people in the Keys talking about floating neighborhoods, floating schools, etc. that are climate adapted. Godspeed. We have to be thinking out of the box. There's, by the way, a huge industry in this. Like, you've been to Miami lately, there's so many, climate change now is a massive industry down there. There's engineers running around everywhere with plans on how they're going to save Miami. and it, better late than never, but it's going to be an interesting century. Ocean acidification, let's telescope down real quick. More CO2 in the ocean creates chemical changes in calcium carbonate cycles, making the ocean water more acidic, lower pH. This cartoon shows some of the chemistry of that. So what if the pH goes down a little bit? It's a little more acidic. Well, the pH is actually dropping substantially relative to timescales in the last 50 years. There's a massive literature on this. And it matters for us because, well, for various reasons, but the thing that I'm focused on, and a lot of people more so than I, are marine fishes and invertebrates. Invertebrates, remember, those are the animals without backbones. They're like lobster, like shrimp, like crabs. They're like seashells. Those are all invertebrates. And then there's a gajillion others. Wonderful things. Got to have them. They all start off with egg and larval stages, almost all of them. These are tiny things. These are larval fishes. These fishes are 5 millimeters. That's about half the length of your fingernail. Okay. So most of these eggs hatch at 2 millimeters. Okay, 5 millimeters, they're larvae, they're in the plankton, they're in the open ocean. That's a harsh environment for a little thing that big that's transparent, looks like a little insect. They're also very susceptible to changes in pH and heat. They have a very complex developmental biological dynamic that they go through. And what they're seeing with a lot of research, and there's a lot of research going on this right now, is that bone development is modified in fishes with lower pH environments that they're bathed in while developing. That can affect homing, their ability to navigate. It can affect feeding. And in invertebrates, remember corals are made out of calcium carbonate, right? So that calcium carbonate cycle is really important in the world's oceans. And so the calcium carbonate cycle, which is, it's the calcium carbonate cycle, it's this one thing with some arrows. It's extremely complicated and variable all over the planet. And there's all kinds of things happening that there's a large literature in the last 10 years on that's almost exploding right now. And I'm not seeing papers saying this is going to be good.